The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, excerpt and guided reading. Preview. Connecting to the literature. You're lying in bed trying to fall asleep, but a leaky faucet will not stop dripping. It seems to become louder and louder, filling the house. Anxiously, you wait for every drop. This common experience shows that at times, your imagination can exaggerate what you hear or see. In this story, Edgar Allan Poe uses this type of experience to create terror. Background. Edgar Allan Poe made the short story into an art form. He believed that the writer of a brief story could create a unity of effect. Every element, from sentence rhythm to a character's personality, would help create a single impression on the reader. In this story, that impression is one of horror. Literary analysis. Plot. Edgar Allan Poe is known for the complex, often terrifying plots of his short stories. Plot is the arrangement of events that tell a story. Most plots have the following parts. 1. Exposition. The situation is set up and background is provided. Conflict. The struggle between two opposing forces. Rising action. Events build toward the high point or climax. Climax. The turning point at which it becomes clear how the conflict will turn out. Falling action. The events that follow the climax. And resolution. The conflict is resolved. The final outcome is achieved. The diagram shows traditional plot structure. Connecting literary elements. A symbol is a person, place, or thing that, in addition to its literal meaning, has other layers of meaning. In The Telltale Heart, events are set in motion by the narrator's reaction to an old man's eye. The narrator's strong reaction is not only to the eye, but to the qualities and ideas the eye represents. As you read, think about the following focus questions. What feelings does the narrator associate with the old man's eye? And what does the eye symbolize or represent? Reading strategy. Making predictions. Become actively involved in the story by making predictions, logical guesses about the upcoming events. First, identify the meaningful details in what the story already has happened. Then, decide what is most likely to happen based on what you know and on the pattern stories usually follow. Vocabulary development. Here are our vocabulary words. Acute. Sensitive or experienced to a severe or intense degree. Derision, contemptuous ridicule or mockery. Dissimulation, hiding of one's feelings or purposes. Scarce, something in short supply. Profound, intellectually deep, getting to the bottom of the matter. Conceived, to form or devise a plan or idea. Sagacity, high intelligence and sound judgment. Suppositions, uncertain beliefs. Crevice, a narrow opening. Macabre, gruesome, horrifying. Gesticulations, energetic hand movements. And dissemble, to conceal under a false appearance, conceal the truth of one's true feelings. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer, poet, editor, and literary critic. Poe is best known for his poetry and short stories, particularly his tales of mystery and the macabre. This is a guided reading, so we will have embedded questions as we go along. I'm going to have a very creepy narrator read to you. And we will pause and go over the guided questions and the annotations together.
The Telltale Heart. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I'm mad? The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how the first idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever.
Whoa. Okay, so let's take a look at our first embedded question here. Narrative perspective. The point of view from which the story is told. In what perspective is this story told? So here we have a few key words that we're seeing. We're seeing I. We're seeing me. We're seeing words that indicate that this is actually being told by a first-person narrator. See how we have these I's in here? So instead of he and taking a look at third person, here we have a first-person perspective. So for our narrative perspective, first person, and let's think, do we think that this narrator, just from what we're seeing so far, do we think this narrator is reliable? He's saying that he has a disease. He's saying that, don't worry, this disease that I have, it hasn't weakened me. It hasn't dulled my senses. In fact, it's given me special powers. He's saying that he can hear things in heaven. He can hear things in the underworld. And he has this special hearing acute. So do you think that this narrator can actually hear things in heaven and hear all of these things that a normal person can? For me, I would say probably so far, right, I'm thinking he's unreliable. So why? The narrator claims he can hear heaven. You can put whatever you want there as evidence of you thinking if he's reliable or unreliable. So right now, so far, we have a narrator who just told us that he has decided to kill an old man. He is going to take the life of the old man because of this guy's eye. So we're thinking maybe this is a caretaker for the old man. This is someone who watches over him and maybe helps the estate because this old man can't do it himself. But he's telling us that this is the story of how he killed an old man. He's reflecting on it, and he's going to take us through how he came up with the idea, what he pre-planned, and how he actually did it. Okay, let's continue reading. I love this creepy narrator voice.
Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no You would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him, as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman be so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I emptied the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I entered it so that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And so I did it for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously at him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, inquiring how he passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moved more quickly than did mine. Never before that night I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph, to think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts.
Okay, this is some level 10 stalking we have right now. So let's take a look at important content really quickly here. So this narrator is telling us that he was super kind to the old man right before he killed him, trying to prove to us that he's not crazy. He had been going into this old man's room at night, and he would creep in, he would put in a dark lantern, he would just open the lantern a tiny little bit so that he could cautiously look at this vulture eye, because he did not want to kill the old man. He wanted to kill the vulture eye. So for 7 nights, he went into this old man's room just before midnight, and he would search for the evil eye being open. And unfortunately, for 7 nights, the eye was always closed. So he could not do the work. He could not kill him because he didn't want to kill the old man. He wanted to kill the evil eye. And so he said he would watch him and watch him, and it wasn't time. So in the morning, he would come in, he would be courageous, he would be kind, he would ask the old man, "How did you sleep last night?" Which is kind of creepy because he knew how he slept, he watched him. And he continued to creep and wait. Okay, so let's take a look at this first one here, figurative language. The narrator is repeating words or phrases in successive clauses. Which figurative language technique is this? So here he's repeating with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation. The repetition of these words at the beginning of successive clauses is an example of. Pause the video, think about it. If you need to, use supportive resources and go to the Quizlet for figurative language. And then once you come up with your answer, play the video and see if you are right. This is an example of an anaphora. An anaphora is repeating a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. All right, let's take a look at number 3. Redundancy is when an author repeats a word or phrase to make a point or to make an impression. What impression does the redundancy highlighted above give? What do you think about the narrator? Okay, so here we have the repetition of cautiously, cautiously. He's creeping into the old man's room cautiously. He's opening up the lantern in the dark cautiously. He's putting the ray of light on the old man's eye to wait to see if it's open cautiously. Him doing this, him stalking the old man cautiously, cautiously, cautiously. What does this do for the reader? How does this make you feel? So personally, you can write whatever you want here. Personally, I would say this repetition is creating suspense, right? The reader is waiting for him to make a move. He stalks this old man for 7 nights, waiting for the eye. So him doing this cautiously, 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 waiting. It's creating suspense. It is creating a slow pacing, and it makes us kind of have feelings of, oh my gosh, is he going to do it? Is he not going to do it? And we are a little bit nervous. Okay, next up is verb moods. Our verb mood options are indicative, which is a statement, imperative, which is a command, interrogative, which is a question, conditional, which is something could or might happen, but it depends on something else, or subjunctive, which is a wish or a hypothetical situation. So here, I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. Could being a key word here. So take a pause in the video. If you want to consult your Quizlet for verb moods, you may. Come up with an answer and then play the video to see if you are right. Conditional is our verb mood here. All right, let's go ahead and continue on to our next page.
I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close-fastened, through fear of robbers, and so I knew he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was a low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of a soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew he'd been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had ever been since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not.
Oh my gosh, okay. Let's take a look at important content of what is happening. So, our narrator, our murderer, our madman, goes into the room on the 8th night, pitch black, and he starts thinking of how good he is at this, how he's so good at stalking this old man. This old man has no idea what he's doing, that he laughs. He laughs at himself. And when he does that, the old man, he moves, he wakes up, and it's pitch black. And so the old man cannot see the narrator. The narrator cannot see the old man. And he says, you probably thought that when he woke up, I stopped, but I didn't. I kept pushing the door open steadily, steadily. Again, we're getting this repetition that's creating suspense. And so then, whenever he goes to open the lantern, his thumb slips. And the old man hears that and he starts crying out and he's like, who's there? We're like, oh my gosh, he's going to rush in. He's going to do it. But he doesn't. He still doesn't move a muscle. He hears the old man sitting there in bed and he hears the old man groaning. And he knows that this is the sound of awe. He's overcharged with awe. He cannot believe it. He knows, the old man knows someone's in here, and he's so terrified. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And so, the narrator, why is he not just jumping in and doing the deed? Why is he just sitting there in the dark with the old man? Because he's enjoying it. He is soaking in the old man's fear. He loves it. Okay, so let's take a look at our embedded questions. 5, figurative language. The narrator makes a comparison between two things using the word as here. It says his room was as black as pitch with a thick darkness. So what is a comparison using like or as? Pause the video, consult your Quizlet under supportive resources for figurative language, come up with your answer, and then come back and see if you were right. This is a simile. Simile. All right, next up, active, passive voice. Is the highlighted sentence active or passive? Remember, active is the subject's doing the action, and passive is the subject is receiving the action. The action is being done to it. So step 1 is look for the subject, I. Step 2, look for the verb, new. We only have one verb. We know passive voice has to have 2 or more verbs. So here, am I the one that's knowing something? Yes. This is an example of active voice. Now, if we were to flip this into passive, we're going to move some things around. So what is being known? The sound. So we're going to flip this around. The sound. And now we need 2 verbs. Was known. Well by me. Now we have the doer at the end of the sentence. Sound is now our subject. Was known are our verbs. The sound doesn't know anything. It's being known. It's receiving the action. So now it's in the passive voice. All right, looking good. Let's see what happens. They're sitting in the dark. It is a standoff. What is going to happen? Let's see.
He had been saying this to himself. It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or it is merely the cricket which had made a single chirp. Yes, he was trying to comfort himself with these suppositions. But he had found them all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited long enough, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it which chilled me to the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the lay as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot.
Oh my gosh, still, he hasn't done anything. All right, so let's look at the content here of important things that are happening. So, at first, he's laughing and enjoying all of the things that he thinks are going through the old man's mind. He's like, this guy's probably thinking like, oh, it's just a mouse, or maybe it's a cricket, maybe that's what I'm hearing. And he is drinking up this old man's fear. He loves it. And so he says, after I've waited a very long time, very patiently, without him hearing me and without me doing anything to like spook him even further, after waiting for a long, long time, he decides to open the lantern. So he opens a little, very, very little, see all this repetition? Crevice in the lantern. And as he does it, stealthily, look at all this repetition. He directs a single, simple ray of light onto the vulture eye. And he looks at it, and it's open. Look at this repetition, wide, wide open. And so he's staring at the open eye. And again, we're thinking he's going to like rush in and kill the old man because finally he can kill the eye. Remember, he doesn't want to kill the old man. He wants to kill the evil eye. And as soon as he sees that eye, again, he doesn't rush in. He gets furious. He has his bones chilled, and he can't even believe that the eye is open as he's staring at it. But he doesn't do it. He directs the ray precisely upon the spot, the eye. Okay, so let's take a look. Relevancy. The old man has been in the middle of night trying to convince himself that everything is okay. Describe a time that you could relate to him and his feelings. So this one is personal. You can write whatever you want here, but you want to make a connection to what this old man is feeling. All right, so you're putting something here where you can relate to what the old man is thinking or feeling. So I put, one time when I went camping, my friends and I kept hearing twigs snap. We told ourselves it was just a deer, but it was still scary and we couldn't know for sure. So that's like me relating to the character. Okay, number 8, figurative language. Here, the narrator gives death human-like qualities. What type of figurative language technique is this? Death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. Here, death is approaching, he's stalking, he has a shadow. This is giving human-like qualities to an inanimate object. So pause, go to your Quizlet, look at some figurative language, see if you can identify it, come back, see if you're right. This is personification. Okay, number 9, we're going to do some annotating here. Number 9, Sensory details. These have to do with our 5 senses, how things look, how they smell, how they sound, how they feel, how they taste. Identify 5 examples of sensory details on this page and highlight them green. Okay, so you don't have to have the same things that I have. That's totally fine. But we're looking for examples of how things sound, how they look, how they smell, how they taste, how they feel. Highlighting these green. Shadows. Opening a very, very little crevice in the lantern. A simple dim ray like the thread of a spider. The eye is being wide, wide open. A dull blue, this is the description of the eye, a dull blue with a hideous veil over it. How does he feel? It chilled the very marrow of his bones. Okay, and a single ray of light being projected on the spot. All right, got some sensory details highlighted. Let's go to our next page.
And have I not told you what the mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew the sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed, and I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now the dead hour of night, amid the dreadful silence of the old house, so strange a noise as has excited me to an uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I've refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. Now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gazily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It was not to be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's look at important content. There's a lot happening on this page. Oh my goodness. Okay, so he says that he has a special sense. He has an over acuteness of the sense of sound, so he can hear things that other people can't. So he says as he's standing there and he has the ray directed on the old man's eye, he starts to hear a low, dull, quick sound, much as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton, and he says, I knew that sound well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. So from across the room, he's hearing the old man's heart beating, and it's beating and beating and beating louder and louder because the old man is nervous. He has this light shining in his eye and he can't see anything, and he knows someone's there, but he doesn't know who it is or what's happening. So he says, we're thinking then he's going to like rush in and do it, but he doesn't. He keeps still and he barely breathes, and he holds the ray upon the eye, and he listens to this old man's heartbeat quicker and quicker and louder and louder. Look at all this repetition. And he says the old man's terror must have been extreme. The heartbeat is growing louder and louder in the dead of the night. And again, we have all of this repetition. The heartbeat is growing louder and louder and louder. I thought the heart would burst. And now, this right here may be showing unreliability. He's saying he had a new anxiety. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. This old man's heartbeat is so loud. He's so scared that unfortunately he can't wait any longer and soak in the fear any longer because the heartbeat is going to be heard by a neighbor. Now, is this real? Is a heartbeat going to be heard by the neighbors? Absolutely not. But in his mind, this heartbeat is so loud that it's going to be heard by neighbors. So he jumps in. He said the old man shrieks once and once only, and then we have him doing the deed. He drags him to the floor. He pulls the mattress of the bed over him, and he suffocates the old man. He said, at length it ceased, the heartbeat. The old man was dead. And he says that the old man was stone dead, and again, stone dead. We're seeing repetition here. He says, the eye would trouble me no more. So here, not only is the eye troubling him, but also the heartbeat is showing that it's troubling him as well. Okay, so let's go up to the questions. So figurative language, the narrator makes a comparison between two things using as. That's our key word. So it says, it increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. So what you're going to do is go onto your Quizlet, look for figurative language. You're going to see what you can find, come back, and see if you're right. This is a simile. All right, down here, irony. The events that seem to deliberately be opposite to what one expects. So, how are the highlight events ironic? But the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once only. Okay, so what is ironic here? What is the opposite of what we expect? So it's ironic that the narrator doesn't kill the old man because of the eye. The whole time he's talking about, I have to kill him because of the eye. I have to kill him because of the eye. The vulture eye. It's evil. It's vexed. It's scary. I have to murder the eye. And then he doesn't actually end up killing the old man because of the eye. He kills him because of the heartbeat. He's worried that the guy's heartbeat, the old man's heartbeat, is going to be heard by a neighbor. So the thing that actually motivates him to kill the old man is the fact that he might get caught. The fact that the neighbors might be alerted to something being wrong because this old man's heartbeat is so loud. So let me ask you this. Do you think that this guy, this narrator, is reliable? Is what he's hearing actually accurate? I'm thinking probably not. There's no way that this man's heartbeat was so loud that the neighbors would hear. All right, let's continue. Unfortunately, we're going to get some gruesome parts here.
If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks of the flooring of the chamber and deposited them all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. No, I'd been too wary for that. The tub had caught all. When I had made an end to all these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves, with perfect suavity, as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, whom I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim.
Wow. Okay, so our narrator this whole time is trying to convince us that he's not crazy. He says, if you still think I'm mad, you won't think so any longer when I tell you about how careful I was to conceal the body. So is he convincing you? Do you think that he's crazy, or do you think that he's perfectly normal? This is totally fine that he's doing this. I think the guy's crazy. So let's take a look at important things. He's saying the night waned and I worked quietly and I worked quickly. He says I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, the arms, the legs. That's disgusting. So he's cutting up this body, and then he says he takes up 3 planks of the floor and he puts all of the body pieces underneath the floorboards, and then he replaces the boards. He says, I was so clever. No one would ever see it. No one would think anything was wrong. And he says, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what about the blood? There must have been blood. There was no blood because I had a tub catch all of it. So he's basically saying that he put this old man in the bathtub and he cut him up, and then he took the body parts and put them under the floor. Oh my gosh, this is so creepy. He says, when I was done with all of that, the bell sounded, and at the door, there were officers, 3 police officers. And these police officers said someone heard a shriek in the middle of the night and that they came to investigate. And this guy is super confident. He's like, what do I have to fear? I told him, come on in. And basically, he's giving them a tour of the house. He says, come in, search well. He said, the old man I mentioned was absent in the country. The old man, he's not here right now. He's out in the countryside. Why don't you come and take a look at all of his stuff? Undisturbed. And he said, I was so enthusiastic. I was doing such a good job of convincing them that everything was fine, convincing them that the old man was in the country and that nothing happened here. That with this enthusiasm and with his confidence, he actually got seats and put them on the very spot beneath which was the corpse of the victim. He sat them on top of the floorboards where the body is underneath. Oh my gosh. Okay. So let's take a look at verb moods. So here, verb moods. Indicative is a statement. Imperative is a command. Interrogative is a question. Conditional is something could or might happen. And subjunctive is a wish or a hypothetical. So here it says in green, what is a verb mood? For what had I now to fear? So taking a look, whoops, sorry. Oh my goodness. Okay, taking a look here, we have a special character. This is a question mark. So that is going to indicate that this is interrogative. Interrogative. All right. Next up, active, passive voice. Active voice is the subject is doing the action. Passive voice is the subject is receiving the action, or the action is happening to it. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. So here, first we look for our subject. Subject is shriek. Then we look for our verb, had been heard. Oh, look, by a neighbor. This is the doer. So is the shriek hearing something, or is it being heard? It's being heard. It's receiving the action. So here, this is an example of passive voice. So now we're going to flip it to active voice. So to do that, we have to think to ourselves, who's doing the action? Who is hearing the shriek? Oh, a neighbor. So we're going to flip this around and we're going to put a neighbor heard a shriek during the night. Now the subject is doing the action. The neighbor is the one that's hearing something. We only have one verb, so now it's active voice. Okay, so he has these officers on top of the floorboards where the old man's body is underneath, chopped up. Let's see what happens next.
The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerfully, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing of my ears. But they still sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued to become more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until, at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound. Not such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the sound was steadily increasing. I rose and argued about the trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the sound steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. Again, so much repetition from Edgar Allan Poe. So he's saying that the officers were satisfied that his manner had convinced them. They were chill. They didn't think anything was wrong. But then as they're sitting there on top of the body, he starts having this sound ringing in his ears, and it's becoming more distinct, and the ringing becomes more distinct. Look at all of this repetition. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but he's saying the noise wasn't in my ears. It was basically what he's suggesting, the heartbeat. So he describes it the exact same as he did before up above. It was a low, dull, quick sound, much as a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. That's repetition from earlier in the story. He said, I'm gasping. I couldn't catch my breath. The officers weren't hearing it, but then he starts going a little bit crazy. Now imagine you're the officers. He's gasping for breath. He's talking quickly. He is arguing with them now about trifles, about things that don't really matter. He's talking in a high key with violent gesticulations, with crazy energetic arm movements. He is pacing the floor to and fro with heavy strides. If you're an officer, and this guy is pacing back and forth, he's waving his arms around, he's arguing, he's gasping for breath, would you suspect that something was wrong? Absolutely. But in his mind, he's saying that they don't suspect anything, that everything is fine. Again, we're noticing this repetition here where the heartbeat is increasing, steadily increasing. It is getting louder and louder. Okay, so let's take a look at tone and mood. Tone is the author's feelings while writing a text. Mood is the reader's feelings while reading a text. So let's think here, what is the tone of this piece of the story, and what is the mood of this piece of the story, and why? So here, I'm going to type this so it's a little bit easier. So tone is the author's thoughts. What do you think the author was thinking while he was writing this? So I would say the tone is suspense. The author was thinking about using repetition and slow pacing. He's kind of dragging out what's happening here to create anxiety for the reader. The tone is suspense, or we could say suspenseful. The author was thinking about using repetition and slow pacing to create anxiety for the reader. Now, on the flip side, what are you feeling while reading this? What is the mood? So, again, this can be different depending on what you're feeling right now, but I would say the mood is anxious. The reader is waiting to see what the narrator does. We feel also, I would say, suspicious about what the narrator is sharing. Right? We don't really have full confidence that what this narrator is saying is what is actually happening. We don't really trust it because, is he hearing a heartbeat under the floor right now? He told us multiple times that this guy is dead, stone dead. And now he's telling us that he's hearing the heartbeat coming from under the floorboards, and he's nervous that these cops are going to hear, so he's making these loud noises and he's pacing back and forth. Is this old man underneath the floorboards actually having a heartbeat? No. It's not possible. But that's what he's hearing, and he's going a little bit crazy here. He's hearing this heartbeat. So I would say a mood, the reader's feels, we're feeling skeptical. We're feeling suspicious. Is this really happening the way he's saying it's happening? All right, let's see what happens in the very end. Is he going to go crazy? Are the officers going to arrest him? Let's see.
Oh, God. What could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the the chair upon which I had been sitting, and I grated it upon the floors, but the noise rose over it all, and steadily and continually increased. It grew louder and louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no. They heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my whore. This is, I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die. And now, again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart.
Oh my gosh. He gives himself up. He gives himself up. According to him, they didn't even know what was going on. So here he is, again, looking absolutely crazy. He is foaming. He is swearing. He swung, I love this imagery. He swung the chair around that he was sitting on, and he starts grating it on the boards back and forth because he's trying to cover up the noise of the heartbeat. And he's saying the noise, it was continually increasing and increasing. It grew louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder. Look at all of this repetition. He says that the men knew he had to give himself up because the men were mocking him. They were thinking it was hilarious. They were sitting there suspecting him. They knew that he killed this man, and they were just smiling with derision and contempt and with hypocritical smiles. And so he actually gives himself up. He says, dissemble no more. I'm pretending no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. So we have so much irony happening here because the entire piece, he's telling us that he had to kill this old man because of his vulture eye, his evil eye. But here the thing that's really vexing him is the heartbeat. So let me ask you this. Do you think that there is a loud heartbeat that is in the room? Yeah, but it's not the old man that's in pieces under the floorboard. It's himself. It's his own heartbeat. His heart is beating so quickly because he is nervous. He is guilty. He is worried that these cops are going to figure out what he did. And in his mind, it's the old man's heart. And so he admits the deed. 15. Analyze the text. What do you think is happening to the narrator here? What is he feeling? What does he actually hear? Do you think he suffers from over-acuteness of the senses, or is he crazy? You guys are going to type your own response here. I'm going to type something up that I'm thinking, that I'm feeling, but I want you to come up with something of your own. So, I think red will show up nicely here. The narrator. All right, so you are going to type what you think. Is the narrator crazy? Is he not? Is he actually hearing things that other people can't hear? Or is this something that's just in his head? Write a response, detailed response about what you think and what you feel about our narrator. Okay, so this was a very creepy piece of dark American Gothic literature. We're going to be analyzing this story together later on, but now your guided reading should be complete. So you are going to submit this for your points today, but also I would export this story to iBooks so that you have it for our analysis later on. Alrighty. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. It definitely was creepy and perfect for October.